All right. I see people are rolling on in. So I would like to officially kick off session three, protecting and securing the value of rural partnerships. This session will cover knowing your value as a healthcare organization, knowing the common mishaps in evaluating rural affiliate value, avoiding value damaging mistakes with selecting a partner and negotiating key terms, and understanding how to improve the performance of a partnership after it's been consummated. And for all of that, I will hand you over to our esteemed leader, Jeff Summer, and our senior consultant extraordinaire, Claire Kelly. Thanks, folks, for taking the time, and let's teach us something.
Thank you, JD. Appreciate the intro. We're delighted to be here with all of you and be able to share some hopefully helpful insights. And so let's get started with the session. Again, a little bit of bio information on both Claire and myself. Should you have questions that pop up after the session, we'd be happy if you reached out to us. During the session, I think there's a question format you can post those in, and we should have time at the end to answer your questions. And I think we'll circulate answers as well to those questions after the session. So to put us in a context here of possible outcomes for rural hospitals, for better or for worse, rural hospitals fit in one of these 5 buckets. And where you are and where you'll end up is really determined by your ability to execute operationally and conceive of strategies and then execute those strategies that will assist your organization. From our perspective as a firm, we have a bias, but I think it's informed by our experience nationally in interaction with health systems all throughout the rural United States and elsewhere. The best outcome in our experience and perspective is thriving independence or interdependence. And we describe that as a locally governed, locally accountable health system that is sufficiently resourced and has sufficient expertise to care for its service area, most of the healthcare needs. And that might be as part of a network, but governance and key decisions really do reside locally. That's kind of an ideal outcome. The next best option to that, slightly to the left, is a good partner or partnership, one that reflects and amplifies the value of a rural affiliate, augments and adds to the capabilities of that rural affiliate, but does it in a way that is accountable, responsive to the local community, and adds capacity, capabilities to what that local rural affiliate can do. That's a good partnership. It's accretive both for the system and for the local affiliate. So that's the next best thing. Unfortunately, many rural hospitals, whether they're partnered or not, are in a state of kind of strategic drift, purgatory. They're neither thriving or they don't have a partnership that is that kind of added value partnership. And they're somewhere caught with results that are not sustainable and perhaps evaluation of results that are not sufficiently accurate of performance from a rural affiliate to that rural community. And so what's really important in this middle section is to make sure that you're ideally moving towards the right within that category. So you're minimizing or reducing your risk and improving your performance and increasing your chances of being in the far right category or in the second to right category, or at the very least from drifting to the left. And these outcomes get progressively worse, being a bad partnership, one that might be somewhat predatory. That is, the partner is coming in and they're extracting value and not adding value. They may have a flawed analysis of rural performance and maybe degrading the functionality and the capabilities and capacity of that rural affiliate over time by underinvestment. We'll talk about that extensively later in this session. And the worst outcome is closure. We had a session earlier today speaking to that specifically, but that's obviously a terrible outcome. And the vast majority of hospitals reside in the middle three categories. I probably would put that number closer to 80% within that middle three categories, but somewhere between 80 and 90%. So we have our first polling question, and hopefully we can have that pop up here. Great. So the question is, if you're in a partnership, how would you rate the performance of the partnership? High value, moderate value, mixed bag, limited value, no value, or destructive of value? How would you evaluate the performance of that partnership from your perspective going forward? We'll give a few more minutes for folks to complete the polling question. Okay. Anybody else? All right. What we can see is the good news is that folks seem pretty distributed towards modestly towards the value creation spectrum. There's about 1 in 8 that are high value, close to 40% that are moderate value, close to 40% that are a mixed bag, and a small fraction that are limited value. So the good news is nobody has said no value or destructive of value. But obviously, of being of limited value is not really where we want to be, and so we'll talk about that. The real focus of this particular conversation today is around if you're thinking about partnering, how do we stay out of that low value to no value or destructive of value category? Or if you're in an existing partnership, how can we maybe nudge that along so it's creating more value for you? So, what do rural leaders need to know? We call this slide our four no's, playing on the KNOW versus NOW. And it's important to know that in our experience working around the country, the majority of rural hospitals in a partnership um, are seeing value that is being missed or mis evaluated and miss there's just errors in the analysis when they're looking at performance of rural affiliates. And so, again, those systems are missing opportunities or they're undervaluing their rural affiliates. And that's the majority of folks. Correlated to that, no one is going to come along and stumble on your value unless you do that work. And quantifying it and showing a path towards operationalizing it. This is what we spend a lot of our time at Stroudwater doing on behalf of clients. But it really is important. There's likely nobody at the mothership who's going to stick their neck out and say, geez, we have our valuation framework wrong and we should be doing it differently, which will show a better result to our rural affiliate. That's not likely to happen. And so it needs to be a dialogue that you initiate if you're in a partnership or if you're negotiating a partnership. It needs to be a set of issues and analyses and a conversation that you bring to the table. So when you're in a partnership, identifying win-wins, what could be beneficial for both me as the rural affiliate and the system? That's really important. We'll talk about this more detail. There's some additional ideas there that are important, but that's important to keep in mind. And as we alluded to earlier, does a partner understand your value? When you're evaluating a potential partner, this is really a key question. First of all, do they understand rural healthcare or what the potential benefits might be of having a rural affiliate? And variable versus fixed costs, contribution margin versus fully allocated cost, and using those when you're evaluating a rural affiliate. And all of these are really key things we'll talk about in a number of case studies to follow. So the four no's, know your risk profile, know your value. No one else is going to promote your value unless you do it. And lastly, there are no risk-free options, right? If you're independent, there's an inherent risk profile with that. And if you're partnered, there's partner risk associated with that. Again, this is something we spend a lot of our time at Stroudwater working on, helping our clients who are either in a partnership or thinking about partnering. How do we mitigate those partner risks? For those that want to remain independent, we spend a lot of our time thinking, how do we mitigate operating and strategic risk? And now a lot of that benefit or mitigation comes through performance improvement work. So, with that, we've talked about partners getting things wrong. What is the overall narrative of rural healthcare, about rural healthcare getting wrong? And I like the analogy of thinking about a book and a movie called Moneyball, which is fundamentally about how the powers that be, the experts in baseball, going back to the, I think, early mid 90s, were fundamentally misevaluating baseball talent. So this book came out in 2003, but it was really about the Oakland A's and specifically a small market team really not being able to compete with the big market teams that could afford to buy free agents. And so the only way they felt they could compete was by finding underappreciated, undervalued players. In this case, the premise was that home runs were overvalued and the ability to get walks and drive up pitch count were undervalued. And this was the GM's, along with some great baseball analysts, concept. And again, on base percentage becoming a key determinant, at least for a period of time in baseball, of wins. And this was not something that was widely valued or appreciated. And the Oakland A's were able to build competitive winning teams for a period of time based upon this premise. Something similar, in our belief, is happening in rural healthcare. That the fundamental story around rural healthcare and the value of rural affiliates undervalues those rural affiliates. We see it time and time again how partners make mistakes. So the narrative is rural healthcare is a dumpster fire. And listen, we've done the analysis. We looked at fully allocated costs, and the result was clear. It's the rural affiliate is costing us money. And we need to shut down or curtail our rural operations to save our shirt. Those statements confirm what many already believe, confirmation bias. But are they correct? And what might they be getting wrong or missing? And they are incorrect and they are missing something. So the next slide is a little mini case study that really illustrates this. So this was a system affiliate. It's actually was more of a community hospital, not your typical small rural hospital, but it was in a non metropolitan area. So this was a 120 bed community hospital affiliate. The system was allocated $25 million of overhead to the affiliate's general ledger, and that created a $13 million operating loss. Based on this, they made the decision to slash capital investment at the affiliate. And we're looking at, geez, should we shutter this or greatly curtail the operations there to stop the red ink? Now that operating loss, that 13 million operating loss included $7 million in depreciation, non-cash expense, and did not include $3 million in non-operating income. So from our perspective on a cash flow basis, it was overstated. And certainly when you look at non-operating income was missing something. But that was really the minor part of the picture. Of that $25 million of system allocated overhead, only approximately 20% were variable or incremental overhead. That is, if that rural affiliate were to go away, $20 million of that system overhead that had been allocated would still remain. From our perspective, in your evaluating performance, you should never count or allocate overhead that will remain even if the rural affiliate were to go away. That's truly fixed costs. And when you're evaluating the performance and the contribution margin of that rural affiliate, that portion of the overhead should not be allocated. So it was really that $20 million of that $25 million was a reallocation of existing overhead costs, not incremental costs. So when you actually start looking at the true contribution margin to the system, that is the value that affiliate contributed towards funding the system as a whole, including overhead. The analysis is very different. So the contribution margin, before considering the value of incremental patient volume from the affiliate, was $17 million. Basically flipped the script, if you will. The affiliate had about $22 million in incremental contribution margin to the system through referrals. So we're deducting the direct variable cost incurred by those referrals, and this is the amount of revenue that was left over that could help defray fixed costs and other variable costs not associated with that work. So the contribution margin of this affiliate was actually $39 million, and it completely changes the script. So instead of curtailing investment and potentially shutting down this affiliate, which would have been devastating to the system's operating performance, the result was, no, this is a valued member. We need to continue to invest there, certainly improve operating performance going forward, but let's not make the mistake of missing or misevaluating their particular value. So we see this particular mistake repeated in one way or another in many, many instances.
Thanks, Jeff. So we're briefly going to talk about kind of some health industry factors that are increasing strategic risk and really leading to industry consolidation. If you attended our first session this afternoon, you will have seen this slide previously looking at rural hospital closures since 2010. We won't spend a ton of time on this, but it's important to acknowledge, given, the amount of rural hospitals that have closed or converted over the past few years. And when we say converted, we mean going from a critical access hospital or a PPS hospital to a rural emergency hospital. We would count a rural emergency hospital as a conversion. And so I think, Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Kansas, all those states have the highest amount of closed or converted hospitals. And you can see that it's really trending down in the South more than it is, out in some of the more Western states and the Northeast. But again, that really has to do with CON laws, et cetera, and the amount of hospitals that are down there. But it doesn't take away that you're seeing a lot of closures that are occurring in the market. So why are these closures happening? These two graphs here represent, the bar graph at the top represents the total number of announced transactions from 2011 through 2025, and the line graph at the bottom shows the average size of the smaller party involved in a transaction from 2011 through 2025. So you can see that starting in about 2019, you're getting that drop off of affiliations that are occurring, especially during COVID. But during that same time, you're seeing a growth in the average size of the smaller party. So post-COVID, it wasn't necessarily a smaller critical access hospital affiliating with a regional referral center. It was two regional referral centers affiliating or two large health systems affiliating. That was starting to become more common. We're starting to see that taper off a little bit all the way through 2025. And we think a lot of that is actually due to the scrutiny that the Federal Trade Commission gave some of those affiliations and really the fallout of that. They were really heavily analyzing folks consolidating. And we think that's kind of resulted in that decrease in large systems affiliating with one another. Some of the catalysts that are driving these affiliations, I don't think many of these will come as a surprise. Staffing crisis, this is staff besides providers. You've got the need to recruit folks who can work the front desk, etc. You have provider shortages that are happening across the country, nursing shortages, etc. You have margin pressure, shortened and increased margins. And one of the big ones that we focus on is economies of scale. The rural market and rural healthcare, there's a lot of minutia in rural healthcare, and finding folks who can navigate that rural minutia and who understand that is increasingly difficult. So making sure folks have the background to be able to do and take advantage of some of those loopholes, we'll call them, is really important and not always common throughout the market. You've seen this slide before, but it bears, again, important to go over again. This is looking at how performance improvement can help mitigate your organization and the risks apparent to your organization. So if we're talking about those health industry kind of factors that are coming down the pipeline and the catalysts that are influencing partnerships, it's really important to examine improved performance and how that can help kind of slow that trajectory towards closure, slow that trajectory towards looking at your strategic options. Performance improvement is always a great mechanism to take advantage of. I won't belabor the point if you've been with us for the majority of the afternoon, but there are various kind of performance improvement initiatives that bear fruitful results. We looked at 30 rural performance improvement projects over the past 30 months, and they had a median of about 1.7 million in financial improvement per organization, equating to about 8% of net patient revenue per organization. So there's a lot of kind of upside to looking at performance improvement, should you choose to do that. So when should you start thinking about partnerships? At Stroudwater, we have a saying that time is never a neutral factor. And what we mean by this is there are adverse events that are going to occur no matter what you're doing. We didn't expect COVID to hit. We've been involved in partnership processes where folks have had lawsuits come up. We've had changes in leadership. We've had fires in server rooms. All of those things are outside of your control as adverse market events. What is important is that you don't wait too long to start thinking about performance improvement and start thinking about your strategic options. It's the one thing that you are able to control. We encounter a lot of folks who say, man, I really wish we'd done this 2 years ago. And before everyone in the room agreed that we needed to do this. If everyone in the room isn't agreeing, then maybe it's the right time to start thinking about it, just to explore your options. It doesn't mean you have to execute on an option, but it's getting everyone up to date and educated on what the options are. So making sure you're moving effectively and efficiently in performance improvement and in evaluating your strategic options is really important. You hear us talk a lot about the stress of an organization. So this is kind of our abbreviated scale that we look at how we would evaluate stress of an organization. We'd consider a stable organization one that has consistent margins, growing top line revenue, is able to reinvest in its asset base, can fund its capital investments, and is growing service lines. You'd move into this more stressed territory if you have 2+ years of declining margins or 2+ years of top flatline revenue. You're maybe not fully able to reinvest in all your capital kind of investments. You can only do a few. You have to prioritize certain facility investments over others, and you may not be able to grow services the way you'd want to. And then finally, we'd start to really move into that distressed territory where it's 3+ years of negative or declining margins, 3+ years of flat or decreasing top line revenue growth. And you're starting to evaluate kind of, all right, what are some cost cutting measures that, they're going to impact core programs, but we have to do them to keep the doors open. Are we going to be able to meet payroll, next month? Those type of things would label you as a distressed hospital. As an organization, it's really important to understand where you fall on this scale and what areas have the most risk for your organization. So we'll get into how stress and risk are related. So your level of risk directly impacts where you fall on that stable, stressed, or distressed scale. And I know you've seen this if you were here with us for our first session, but really what we want to talk about here is that these different areas of risk, financial risk, operating risk, value risk, and market risk, are all interconnected. So if you suffer, quality at your organization goes down in that value risk sector, that can impact your volume and your operating risk, your revenue growth and your financial risk, and your market position and your market risk. They're all interconnected. As a board, as leadership of an organization, it's really important to know what the risk of your organization is and to not look at it in a 1-year silo, but look at it over time, over 3 to 5 years. Where has that trend line gone? Are you scaling downward or are you growing? If you're scaling downward, that may mean you're headed from a stable to a stressed hospital, or worse, a stressed to a distressed hospital. So it's important to say, okay, this is our risk. This is how it's been over the past 3 to 5 years. And this is where we fall on this stress scale. And now let's start to evaluate, our options moving forward and some performance improvement initiatives that we can enact. And with that brings us to our next polling question. We'll see if we can get that to pop up here. Perfect. So, how important is it for your organization to explore a new partnership or improve an existing partnership within the next 2 years? Very important, important, we're thinking about it, unlikely, or very unlikely. And we'll give folks about another 15 to 20 seconds or so to respond. Right. Okay. Gonna end the poll. Share the results here. About 47%, very important. 26% important. 5% we're thinking about it. 16% unlikely, and 5% very unlikely. So, over 45, close to 50%, very important to start thinking about partnerships in the next 2 years and evaluating those options. So if you're thinking about that, it's really important that you understand that there's no risk-free option here. Whether you remain independent and are looking at operating risk and performance improvement, or you're thinking about partnerships, really the best option for you is the one that's going to mitigate your risks the most, but there's inherent risks with each. So I don't think we'll belabor these points too much today, but just an understanding that no matter what option you choose, those are going to come with risks. And if you can figure out ways to kind of take some of those risks off the table, that's probably going to be the best option forward for you. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Thank you, Claire. So when we think about partnerships, there are certain approaches that we think have shown definite promise and definite results in terms of ensuring that things create value, partnerships create value. First, it's important to know that there's a complete continuum and a lot of different options when we speak about partnership, ranging from things that are fairly loose, like a network or a co-op or a clinical affiliation, to things that are much more aligned. Often the trade-off is, as you move to the right on this continuum, you lose autonomy, you lose decision rights, but presumably, this isn't always the case, but it should be accompanied with a greater commitment of resources, managerial resources, clinical resources, financial resources, to address potentially gaps in capacity and constraints on the affiliate. Which option makes the most sense for you is really dependent upon your organization's specific opportunities, objectives, needs, and constraints. So what are the things you need to be successful, and what do you then require? If it's simply we're looking for a partner, a clinical partner to help us build a center of excellence in oncology or in cardiovascular health, that doesn't necessarily involve moving to the right-hand side of the spectrum. You can do a limited focus service line clinical affiliation, and maybe you even create a limited clinical service line joint venture. But again, that's not a whole organization affiliation. It's a partnership and a joint venture with a specific focus in a given service line. So again, the right choice depends upon your organization's risk profile and capabilities and what you in fact need from a prospective partner. The other element to this is, and it's always a bit of a wild card, what are prospective partners willing to give you? There's always a trade-off. And, it's examining those trade-offs. Well, if I give up this, I can get that. That really informs what the right decision is. But some organizations make it very clear, we're not willing to do something that's an asset purchase or a sale. We want to retain some either key aspect of local control, etc. So again, a complete continuum. The right answer is organization specific and based upon your risk profile and your operational and strategic needs. When you think about partnering, there are certain value levers that are available to rural affiliates. And it's really important that you as the rural affiliate are aware of these, but that ideally you have a partner that is aware of these or willing to learn and acknowledge them. So first off, cost-based payment for critical access hospitals is a very different environment, and one that we've even seen system CEOs that 20 years before, 25 years before came out of the critical access hospital environment, but now they're a system CEO, and they've kind of frankly don't really think about decision making in terms of cost-based payment anymore. They think about it in terms of certainly prospective payment and certainly from the larger system perspective. So the cost-based payment, a really important lever and a unique lever. Cost report optimization as a potential tool. We often see very significant opportunities that are missed at the rural affiliate and can be better optimized. The home office cost allocation, which is a really important consideration for folks that are either in a partnership or thinking about partnering. How is that allocated? How is that part of the overall evaluation of the rural affiliate's value to the system? 340B eligibility, really important and evolving, really significant upside for many organizations. That's something that's very difficult for many organizations to consistently manage and optimize, and often has unrealized potential. And then you have things like swing beds, rural health clinics, et cetera. The last one I want to talk about on the bullet point there is the true value of incremental referrals. Again, what we have seen, we've documented this time and time again, when a system has a local affiliate, a rural affiliate in a given submarket, that system's market share tends to be higher and be increased as a result of that affiliate versus neighboring markets where they may not have an equivalent rural affiliate. So there is incremental value. And what we want to do is make sure that that system, when you're negotiating partnership terms, includes that in the analysis so that those terms reflect your value to the system. Same chart we discussed earlier, but with a little more detail on it. And what we want to just reveal here is as you move along that continuum, certain additional opportunities become available to you. So there's a whole wide range of clinical things you can do really almost anywhere along that continuum. But as you start wanting to get into tapping into benefits like, okay, could we access 340B through our critical access hospital affiliate because we as a system don't qualify? Well, you need to have that organized under the umbrella of your rural affiliate to do so, which requires tighter alignment. The home office cost allocation requires tight alignment. Globally speaking and generally speaking, operational control and operational risk are required for the home office cost allocation to be able to be tapped into, which again moves you to the right-hand side of that continuum. But that's all part of the analysis and the trade-off of which partnership structure is the right fit for your organization if you are going to partner. And as Claire alluded to, partnering is not a risk-free endeavor. And what we spend a lot of our time doing as a practice here at Stroudwater is really working on behalf of our clients to mitigate partner risk. So for prospective partners, selecting a strategically aligned partner, one that understands rural and values rural. So that's really important. You can do that by obviously meeting with them and negotiating with them, but it's also really important to assess their track record. Does market share at all their rural affiliates drop consistently after affiliation? That suggests that there's one level of investment and commitment that may not match their words. So you want to make sure you get the right partner. You also want to make sure that you've got an affiliation structure that fits with your objectives and your constraints and needs. That is, it's addressing those gaps. So if one of the things is financial weakness and access to capital or access to significant and robust management resources, that might suggest something on the right-hand side of the continuum of affiliation options. However, if your needs are more limited, maybe there's a certain specific limited management resources you want access to, or maybe limited clinical and focused clinical resources you want access to. That means you could be on the left-hand side of that continuum. So again, you want to craft that around your needs and your constraints. And the last thing that's really critical is making sure that the any affiliation agreement, including going back to a non-binding letter of intent. I want to emphasize that any of those documents should have contractually enforceable language and contractually enforceable terms that specifically address your objectives and your constraints and your needs. I would never sign a letter of intent that did not have terms that were even though the letter of intent is non-binding, those terms go into the binding documents. So you want to make sure those terms have language that would be contractually enforceable and are defined and are responsive to your needs. If you sign a letter of intent without that detail associated with it, you've essentially given somebody a 6-month exclusive, potentially, depending upon the term of the letter of intent, without having committed anything, even in a non-binding way, in writing as to what they're going to do with the partnership. So for existing partners, the situation is a little more nuanced. You don't have that same negotiating leverage. So it's really important to have a dialogue and open communication. Does the partner understand your value proposition? Let's highlight and educate those. Ensure that the structure still matches our needs. We've worked to correct um, um, structures that were erroneously selected and a poor fit for the needs and objectives of the rural affiliate, and then have reworked those. That's not ideal. You want to get this right at the outset, and you want to basically work with your partner to quantify any missed or potential opportunities. Understanding the return on investment, the ROI, the payback time, and frankly, maybe starting with some things that have a lower investment threshold to begin with, to build credibility, build that win-win mentality, and build the goodwill, and then you can go for some pricier, riskier, bolder opportunities. So we talked about this already. I kind of stolen my own punchline here, but you want those opportunities that you identify with an existing partner to be low cost to implement, ideally, at least to start with, quick payback time, the ability to execute. You want that to be something that's not in question, and it needs to create value for both the affiliate and the system, and be a strategic fit. So that's really important. What I would urge folks that are in existing partnerships to understand is it's not specific to you. We see this time and time again. The folks at the system level are focusing on other issues, and many of them don't understand rural affiliates. And so it is an education process, and you can break through that if you can quantify and communicate your value proposition to your system partner. So this is a case study that I really like because it illustrates this point really, really well. We got a call, I think 18 months ago or so ago, from a multi-hospital system that had 4 small critical access hospital affiliates. Between them, these 4 affiliates only had about 55 million in operating revenue. This system hired us to do an in-depth financial and operational analysis. The system was convinced that these 4 affiliates were essentially dragging them down, bleeding them dry. And so what we found was that we identified about $6 million in missed annual operating cash flow improvement opportunities. Things like fully utilizing swing bed, fully maximizing 340B opportunities. Those types of opportunities contributed to that 6 million. But we also found about $9 million in errors in how the system was evaluating the contribution margin of these rural affiliates. Either they were allocating some portions of overhead inappropriately, or they'd missed key aspects of the value proposition. And so as a result, there's about $15 million of value that the system wasn't including in its analysis of these folks, including 6 million in directly incremental operating cash flow opportunities. And that obviously changed the dynamic of the decision and the facts surrounding and informing the decision. So they ended up with a very different point of view and strategy as it related to those rural communities. And the engagement ended up kind of providing a roadmap for unlocking some additional value. This type of thing is something we see frequently, and we're going to allude to it a little bit later. But I think it's a really powerful case study. So for new partnerships, it's really important. You have an opportunity to get this right when you have maximum negotiating leverage. It's can be expensive and challenging to try to redo or renegotiate a partnership once it's in place. I don't recommend it. There are things you can do, but I don't recommend it. It's important to get it right at the outset. So the key facet here is have partners compete for the privilege of being your partner. Don't enter into exclusive talks. Have multiple folks coming to the table, and you want to be able to evaluate them and their proposals. So use the process to gather information about your options. You aggregate that information. You're creating an information asymmetry. You're the only one who has all that information, and you can use it to your advantage. And you can also use the process to educate the prospective partners as to your value. We've done this before on behalf of clients, really talking about home office cost allocation or other potential opportunities that exist with a rural affiliate and making sure that the partner is aware of those. Really, that becomes a negotiation and a way to evaluate partners. As you bring these value creation opportunities to them, are they willing to rethink their proposal? Are they willing to rethink how they view you as a potential affiliate? And is that reflected in potential terms included in their proposal? So really important to leverage that process to realize those benefits and create that kind of competitive environment. I mentioned this before, but it's critical to evaluate partners' track records. Don't just take their word on it. Dig into what their track record at their affiliates has been, because that can be very enlightening. And what we found is the words sometimes don't track with the actual track record. And they're saying all the right things, but not necessarily doing the right things. And as I mentioned this before, a letter of intent should be accompanied with a term sheet that spells out those key contractually enforceable terms that are directly responsive to your objectives and address your needs and constraints as an organization.
And with that, we have our third polling question. That pops up. Awesome. How confident are you that your board truly understands your organization's strategic risk profile? I'll give folks about 20 to 30 seconds to respond before moving forward. Great. So I'm going to end it here. It looks like we've got folks stopping to respond. So we've had no respondents for extremely confident, about 30% at confident, 43% not very confident, 21% not at all confident, and 7% unknown. So it sounds like we have some education to do around our strategic risk profile for your organization. And we wanted to highlight a couple case studies as some of the examples of things that we've talked about today. The first one was with an organization that Jeff and I worked with in the Mid-Atlantic area. They were a critical access hospital, and they'd identified an affiliation partner. They'd already had, I believe it was an LOI signed, and they approached us for assistance because that affiliation process had stalled. Their potential partner, even though they had signed an LOI, wasn't really coming to the table, wasn't participating in conversations, wasn't giving them what they wanted in terms of commitments or being, showing that they would be a good partner for their organization. Their chosen partner at the time really did not understand the value proposition that critical access hospital had in front of them. So Stroudwater and Meck recommended that we let the terms of the LOI expire and kind of go back to the drawing board and instead run a competitive process where they invited multiple regional referral partners to the table, including their previously identified partner. And what we did with that is not only did we have a competitive process, but we also educated all interested parties on the unique value proposition of this critical access hospital. Things that Jeff's mentioned, the home office cost allocation, rural health clinics, 340B, swing beds, cost-based payment, etc. And what we found was that, once again, that original preferred partner didn't even though we had 2 to 3 one-on-one education sessions with them, didn't really want to engage. They didn't understand the value proposition, kind of acknowledged that it was there, but didn't change their terms or their contract deal terms in any way, shape, or form. However, because we ran a competitive process, another potential partner came to the table who had rural affiliates, understood how to affiliate with a rural hospital, had experience with distressed rural hospitals and turning around a track record of successful turnarounds with those rural hospitals. Again, getting to that point Jeff emphasized of understanding the track record with rural affiliates. And our client was able to affiliate with that preferred partner, and they entered into an LOI and later closed with a definitive agreement with that preferred partner with, again, strong commitments to maintain services, to keep their critical access hospital status, etc. So again, they went from having a partner that wasn't really coming to the table or engaging to one that truly understood their rural value and was able to enforce commitments that reflected that. And another brief example is, an organization that was a large health system. We had a client that was entering in discussions with this large health system, and they really misunderstood the value of the home office cost allocation, placing about 100K incremental value on the allocation versus Stroudwater's estimate of about 3 million. They also had kind of looked at some other things incorrectly, such as cost-based payment, and they hadn't really factored in the modest change in referral patterns that they have of folks now being referred to their regional referral center versus going elsewhere from this critical access hospital affiliate. And really what this demonstrates is this health system, not out of malice, not out of ill will or wanting to cheat our partner, they just weren't educated or didn't understand really the value of the rural affiliate and how these could be quantified. And once these were shown to them and they were educated on it, they went back to the table and changed some of their deal terms and partnership terms for the benefit of our client and partner. So again, through that act of educating that really sophisticated health system, we were able to get enhanced kind of partnership commitments from them for our client. And with that, we'll kind of launch into some key takeaways here.
Yeah, I think one of the points we really hope is a takeaway for folks is that regardless of whether your decision is to remain independent or partner, or if you're in an existing partnership, sound operating results really are essential to those. And so for folks that are contemplating partnering, one of the best things you can do, in addition to running a competitive process, the other best thing you can do is improve operating results and have a story and a plan you're executing on as part of that process. So we want, folks that we work with oftentimes do have gaps in terms of what's required to be sustainable versus where they are. We want to quantify those gaps and then have a discussion around what those are. And again, performance improvement is relevant to a desire to remain independent, but it is also highly relevant to partnering and if you're in an existing partnership. So those all become really quite important. So one of the things, what is the result of folks misunderstanding, undervaluing the value that a rural affiliate brings? Well, one is, and it starts right at the stop, the deal terms don't reinforce and don't reflect that value. And so as a result, some of those key terms that reinforce long-term value creation are absent, and that creates a whole realm of potential for adverse outcomes. Adverse outcome number 2 is systems often miss value-added opportunities or fail to account for the actual value of what's being done. So we're missing out on opportunities that are potentially there, and we're misevaluating the things that are actually being done. And so that then affects how we're evaluating performance and how we're allocating resources, which leads to adverse outcome number 3, chronic underinvestment in rural affiliates. This has a self-reinforcing feedback loop to it. If you're chronically underinvesting, the capacities, capabilities of that organization, both from a human capital perspective, but also from an equipment and a facility perspective, are compromised over time. And that then leads to poor or degraded performance at both the system level and the rural affiliate level. So again, we see this errors in assessing value, errors in understanding value, and then how that then plays out through partnerships, if not addressed really well at the outset, then really dilute overall system performance and certainly the performance of rural affiliates. So it's important to stop this before it can start cascading. Key lessons learned. We've talked about operational performance as essential to any strategic option. Time not being a neutral factor. The status quo and deferring decisions, deferring action is not something that is going to serve the vast majority of organizations well going forward. Know your value, do the homework. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Stroudwater will, but you need to initiate that process. Your system is not going to do that work, or maybe not do it well. There are no risk-free strategic options. So every option has strategic risk with it. And our goal when we're working with clients is helping them mitigate those risks, whether it's operating risk as an independent organization or partner risk if for an organization thinking about a partnership or in a partnership. So we come back to the fundamentals, having a competitive process, selecting a strategically capable and aligned partner. They're going to help you address gaps in your performance and address needs and constraints. Getting the right structure that facilitates that, right? If you need capital, you need a structure that's going to bring capital. If you don't want any compromise of your decision rights, then you need to have a structure that's not going to compromise your decision rights. And making sure the terms are contractually enforceable. That really is the playbook for ensuring that value is not compromised, is not degraded over time. And it starts at the start of a process, and then there's various points and things that can be done after that fact, but it's really important to get it right at the outset if you can. So with that, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
You are at the end.
Yes.
So great presentation, a ton of information, ton of content. We probably only have time for one question because I know you each have follow-up presentations. But hey, if you're in a partnership and it's not going well, in 1 minute, what would you recommend for next steps?
1 minute, that's tough.
You get what you can get.
I think the first thing is to really try to recreate and reconstruct the evaluation framework which the system is using to evaluate that rural affiliate. If you can engage them and say, wait a minute, I honestly think you're missing value, and that's a good place to start. The other thing is more modest, and it would be to try to find a win-win to build confidence, build that credibility, find some early opportunity that's gets you on the winning side of the ledger, if you will. You're creating value now for the system, and now you've got credibility that you can build off of. So really two different approaches. I think you can use both concurrently, but that would be my recommendation.
Claire, unfortunately, Jeff took the entire minute, so I cannot go to you. But thanks so much for both of your presentations. The presentation showed the value that rural hospitals can provide not only for their communities, but also for existing or potential system partners. So fantastic, and thank you. At this point, if everyone would return back to the event lobby, you have a choice to join one of two sessions. So we have one that's the role of partnerships and restructuring for rural hospitals, and that will be with Claire again and Jennifer. And then also another option is key considerations for county and district-owned hospitals with Jeff and Trent, for those of you that sit in that space. But again, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you in the next presentations. Thanks very much.